So whatever area you are in Hungary, there's something awesome. Obviously, in Budapest, there's tons to see. A lot of history, a lot of beautiful, beautiful buildings. They call Hungary the Paris of the Eastern Europe because it's so beautiful. Parliament building is gigantic. There's the Szent István Basilica, which is St. Stephen's Basilica, over in Budapest. That's also huge. Budapest is just full of awesome buildings and awesome sites. Once you get outside of Budapest, it's a little bit harder to find things, but there are castles in Hungary. Visited a lot of castles. In the eastern part of the country, it's a little bit more flat. They call it the Alföld, which means like the lowlands. And so it's a little bit more like the Midwest of the United States, but it's beautiful in a different way than the West or the Northeast. There's more mountains, or I guess what they call mountains are more like hills compared to our mountains here, but they're just covered in trees, covered in green. I never saw a scene in Hungary that I didn't think was absolutely beautiful. Up in the northwest, the biggest church in Hungary is called the Esztergom Basilica, and it is, I can't remember the statistic, but it's one of the biggest basilicas in all of Europe. Visited that. Again, castles, anything that's really old. Everything in Europe is so much older than anything in America. In my first area, in Pécs, they have old Christian ruins, or I guess an old Christian cemetery that's dated early, like 1000 AD or before that. So it's way older than anything I had ever experienced, and that was super cool. Cultural differences, I would say that there's not a lot that are very weird or very different from living in America. It's a little bit harder to talk to people, but once you start talking to them, sometimes they don't stop. Again, they're very focused on the family. They love their ancestry. They love the fact that they're Hungarian and that their fathers were Hungarian, that their fathers were Hungarian. And they have great pride for their country and for their culture. And that was really respectable to see, their patriotism towards their country. Anytime they hear that you're from another country, they just want to tell you facts all about Hungary. Did you know this? Did you know this? Did you know that this Hungarian invented this? Did you know that this was invented in Hungary? I kind of feel the same way now whenever I hear any facts about Hungary. I get so excited. But yeah, they just love their country to pieces. When you go into someone's home, they've invited you and they just want you to feel as comfortable as possible. Most of the time they won't ask you to take off your shoes, and if you do, they'll provide slippers for you to slip on so your feet don't get too cold. Anything that they offer you, if you accept it, they'll love you forever. If you're kind of hesitant, if they offer you something, I don't know, it's maybe a little bit hurtful to them. If they ask you for seconds, you know, they're overjoyed if you say, yeah, I'll have seconds of that food. But if you're not, you can just say politely, like, I'm pretty full right now, and they'll respect that most of the time. And they'll say kind of straight up when they serve you something, if you don't like it, you don't have to eat it. But they're very accepting in that way. They make something called pörkölt, which is just stewed meat. You can use anything with meat, or any kind of meat with that. But there was a couple times where I had kind of weird pörkölt. There was one with pig hooves, so it was just basically like pig bones covered in fat and then covered in skin, and so there's like still hairs in it. And that was like a little bit difficult to gag down. I was like, so I guess one of the people that was feeding it to me, she saw me kind of just like stirring it around. She's like, eat the meat on it. And I was like, where's the meat? This is a bone with fat on it. And then she pointed to the fat. She's like, that's the meat, and that's what they eat with it, or that's what they eat out of it. And so that was a little bit different. Another thing that people eat, especially around Christmas time, that is pretty popular, lots of missionaries didn't like it, was something called kocsony. Also interesting fact, kocsony, there's another word called korcsolya. Korcsolya means ice skate, and kocsony is like this, they call it pig jello. So sometimes missionaries will get that mixed up. Like, oh, what'd you eat? Oh, I ate ice skate. Kind of funny. Anyway, but what it is basically they start out kind of like a soup, and they cook a lot of bones to get a lot of collagen in the water. They'll cook it with spices and stuff, and then little bits of random meat parts that you wouldn't really eat. The ears, pig snout, whatever, lots of cartilage. And then, so they'll cook it into a soup and then refrigerate it, put it in a pan, and it'll just set. So if you can imagine Jello, basically like Jello, but it tastes kind of like a meat soup. It didn't taste bad. I'm sure if it was in soup form, a lot more people would eat it, but it's in like a Jello form and it has like chunks of chewy meat in it, and then they'll just cut it up and kind of eat it with their fingers. And so I had that a couple times and I ate it. I didn't go directly for it, but it didn't taste bad. I don't think there was anything that tasted bad in Hungary, just different things. So when I first got to Hungary, I thought it would be like completely different than living in the US, but it's been pretty built up. It's getting more and more Americanized. So like shopping, I had no idea what to expect about shopping, but they have grocery stores just like we do here. One interesting thing is they also have random stores. So they'll have like a meat store, kind of like a butcher shop, or a flower store just for selling flowers just on the side of the street. They have bakeries everywhere. You can pretty much find anything that you find in a grocery store in a specific shop, just somewhere in town, or you can go to a grocery store. So it's kind of, there you can see like the traditional aspect of shopping in Hungary. Most of the older men and women, go to these specific shops like every day or every other day. So they go to their fruit and vegetable stand, and then they go over to the meat shop, and then they go over to the bakery, and that's kind of how they do their shopping. Most of the younger generation is going more towards the supermarket aspect. So housing, I lived in quite a bit of different apartments. Some apartments were just, in alleys. But then because of communism, there was a need for mass housing. So they built big 10-story buildings and 5-story buildings. And I would say most of the apartments that I lived in were in those big block buildings. Has central heating, so everyone gets the same heating, central water. The 5-story buildings don't have elevators usually. So there was one area where I lived on the top of a 5-story building, so there's a lot of walking. 10-story buildings had elevators. Some of them were kind of sketchy, but they worked pretty well. Transportation. Hungary has really, really good public transportation. Depending on the city that you have, or the city that you serve in, it's going to be a little bit different. But we rode a lot of buses, city buses. Some of the cities that I served in, everyone just had a bike. No one owned a car, and so it was just bikes everywhere, which is kind of cool to see. One of my favorite things in Hungary was riding trains. Anytime we needed to get back to Budapest, we would ride a train. The way it works is Budapest is kind of the hub of everything, and then you have train lines that just go out to the rest of the country. And so wherever you are, if you need to go to Budapest, you just ride a train. And trains were something that I was unfamiliar with. The first time I stepped on a train, going to my first area, I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. I remember going back up for some conference or something in Budapest and getting to ride in one of the kind of like the compartments in a train, kind of like in Harry Potter. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. Also on a train you don't get lots of bumps at all. It's a really smooth ride most of the time. And just looking out at the Hungarian countryside, most of the time I would just stare out the window. And it was beautiful, whatever season. If you're going through the west or the middle part of the country, especially in the summer, one of their big industries is sunflower oil. And so there will just be fields and fields of sunflowers as far as you can see. And I don't know of anywhere in the United States where you can really experience that. One of their other big industries is poppies, or poppy seed. They eat a lot of poppy seed and export it as well. And so you'll see fields of red poppies, or sometimes you'll see on the train tracks just poppies just growing up on the train tracks, even though there's not poppy fields for miles. They just get blown in the wind, and that was really picturesque and pretty artistic just to see that. Just those little things that I miss about Hungary. I would say most of the things in Hungary are a lot cheaper than the US. Food is definitely cheaper. Housing is cheaper. McDonald's is a little bit more expensive just because I guess it's not Hungarian. But it really depends on where you go. The monetary system, they use something called the Hungarian forint. And right now, I think the exchange rate is somewhere around 280 forint to $1. It took a little while to get used to that. You have like a 10,000 forint bill, and it seems like a lot of money. It's about $45 or something like that. And so it was interesting coming back to the US and getting used to the dollar again as well. So I'd have to like convert dollars to forint to know what I was getting. They use a lot of coins, coins and bills, but you probably shouldn't pay with all coins. Sometimes they get mad. Hungary's kind of split up between the western half and the eastern half. Western half is it's a little bit more hilly, a little bit more green, and the eastern half is a little bit more grassy and stuff like that. As far as weather is concerned, it's not too much different than here. Highs and lows wise, it doesn't snow a whole lot. It is more humid than Utah, so when it's hot, it feels a lot more hot. When it's cold, it feels a lot colder. But other than that, there wasn't too many extremes. Nothing that I wasn't prepared for before I went out. I love the people. Again, they're a little bit more closed off at first, but once you develop a relationship or begin that relationship, they become your best friends for life. They're super, super generous in everything. They just want you to be as comfortable as you are. I don't know, I talk with them all the time still, and they're my favorite people. Best Hungarian foods: paprikás csirke, which is chicken paprika. Let's see, stuffed peppers, tilted paprika, tilted kaposta, which is stuffed cabbage. That's probably one of my favorite ones ever. They eat that a lot during Christmas time. It's like cabbage leaves that have been either pickled or boiled, and then they have a rice and meat mixture that they roll up in it and then cook it for a really long time. And they cook it with sauerkraut as well. And so it gives it a little bit different flavor, something that I was kind of unfamiliar with, but it's the best food ever. But whenever anyone asked me what my very favorite food was, I told them szilvás gombóc, and that's a plum dumpling. So you start out with a little plum, and then they have sort of a potato dough that they wrap around it, and then they boil it, and then they roll it in breadcrumbs and cinnamon sugar. And I just could not get enough of those. Every area, what do you like? Szilvás gombóc. Most of the time I would, tell them that in hopes that they would invite me over sometime for szilvás gombóc. And in one of my areas, I guess I talked about it so much that one of my investigators made them for me and then took a picture, and then before I left, gave me a mug of me eating szilvás gombóc on the mug. So I'll always remember how much I love szilvás gombóc. A little bit difficult to make, but so worth it. So worth it. Any of their pastries, whether you buy them in the bakery or if they're homemade, never had something that I didn't love. They have a lot of rétes, which is like a strudel, lots of different types. Something that I mentioned earlier was poppy seeds. They eat a lot of poppy seed. Here in America, the only thing we eat with poppy seeds is like poppy seed muffins, and the poppy seeds are just scattered throughout the muffin. In Hungary, that's like the main, they make it into a paste, and then they put it inside baked goods. And it has a little bit different flavor. A lot of missionaries don't really like it, but I loved it. They call it mac. They put that in rétes, and so it's just like chock full of poppy seeds Another thing that they use a lot is something called turo, which is kind of like a dry cottage cheese, a little bit more, I don't know, it falls apart more. And we don't really have it here in America, but they'll sweeten it with sugar and with lemon zest usually, and then just put that in rétes or put that in other baked goods, and I loved that so much. A lot of things that I really, really loved we can't really get here, so I miss Hungary a lot, Hungarian food. They have Goulash or Goulash, which is really popular, probably the most popular Hungarian dish, and that's basically a stew with meat and potatoes and carrots and other vegetables. But the trick is the paprika that makes it Hungarian. That's the most popular Hungarian spice is paprika, Hungarian paprika, and most Hungarian food starts out the same way with onions and oil and then paprika, and then you just go from there. I got a lot of mixed opinions about communism. Under communism, everyone has a job, no matter what. You have a way of making money, even if it's just a little bit. Because of that, there's not a lot of hunger, there's a lot of people with food. But it's very strict, very regulated, not much freedom at all. A lot of people that I talked to that were out of work kind of looked back to communism and said, oh, if we still had communism, I would have a job right now. But they wouldn't really focus on any other aspect. But then again, a lot of people were so happy that communism had left. They're very proud of their Hungarian heritage, and when communism sort of came in, the communists kind of tried to dumb that down or to try to repress that. So one of the biggest events that they celebrate is October 23rd, and it's called Freedom Day. Under that time, they were really fed up with communism. It was right in the most powerful stages, I guess, and they were just fed up. And so there was a revolt in Budapest, and it was a really long, really violent revolt. It lasted for about a week, and by the end of it, lots of people had died. It was all just the citizens against the soldiers. So it was whoever just felt the need to fight for freedom. But by the end of that, they ended up being able to kick the communists out. And so that was the turning point. And they celebrate that day every year. It was way cool to see how proud they were. And this accomplishment. Like, no one would have guessed that they'd be able to do this, but they were able to do it. One of the funnest things that I learned was the longest word in Hungarian, because you can make a noun into a verb and a verb into a noun and then tack on things and then make that into a verb and so on and so forth. Words can get really long. I don't really use this word because the context just has to be right, but the longest word that I know in Hungarian is megszentség-taleníthetetlenséges-kedéséitekért, which is pretty crazy, but it means for all of your sanctifiableness, which would be kind of hard to use in a conversation, but it's technically a word. But it's kind of fun, kind of cool. One thing that Hungarians are very excited about is their language. If you ask any Hungarian, it's the hardest language in the world, and they're very proud about that. Hungarian is a very old language. It hasn't really been changed much through time. A lot of the languages that were in the past similar to Hungarian have kind of died out. And the only language that experts say is similar to Hungarian is Finnish, but it's still very different. Hungarian is tough, very difficult. It's difficult for a number of reasons. The grammar is very complicated, and depending on how you say things, you can say something completely different than what you wanted to say. There's not a set word order, so it's very flexible with word order, where you can put the direct object before the noun, you can put it after the noun, you can put adjectives wherever, just depending on what you want to say. To emphasize something, you put it in the beginning of the sentence, so most of the important things are in the beginning part, and all the other details are like at the end. It's pretty different than English, so to be able to kind of think in Hungarian takes a really, really long time, or at least it did for me. I didn't pick that up right away. So in Hungarian, it's called an agglutinated language, which means everything is tacked on to words. So you'll start with a word, you'll have something that maybe comes in front of the word that hits or that attaches to that, and then you'll have all the prepositions and stuff, all the conjugations after it. So you can start out with a word like this long and then end up with a word like this long. And so what they taught us is to kind of read a word from backwards to forwards. So that was also really different. You see a word that you think is completely unfamiliar, but then you sort of like break it up and kind of understand it. Sometimes we can have a full sentence in English, but in Hungarian, it's just one word. So to my siblings, in English, that would be one word. In Hungarian, it'd be testvéreimnek. Testvér is sibling. Testvéreim. That aim means they're mine, like my siblings, and then nek at the end means to them. That's a really simple example of that. But the Hungarians are very patient. Again, they know that their language is the hardest in the world, so they're very willing to help you, to correct you, but to do it in a loving manner, and to let you speak. One of the hard things in Hungarian, or at least for me, was when you're speaking to older people or people of authority, you use different conjugations or conjugate in a different way than you would with other people. Kind of a formalization. And it's really difficult to kind of switch your brain to formalizing someone rather than informalizing someone. But if you go up to anyone and you're formalizing them, they're formalizing you, and you ask, hey, I'm learning this language, can I just use these other conjugations? Can I informalize you? They'll be like, oh yeah, for sure, you can talk to me as if we were friends. And so that was really cool to see. I think Hungarian is the best language. Crime is actually not like a huge issue in Hungary, or at least I didn't see it as a huge issue. Every once in a while you'd hear about a theft or something like that. Social problems, poverty is pretty prevalent in Hungary. A lot of people get by, but because the cost of food is so low, it's pretty eye-opening to learn how much they really make. A lot of them work in factories and work long hours to provide for their families, and it's respectable because a lot of times those are the jobs that they can get. Because of that, a lot of them are pretty humble. There are a lot of addictions that are pretty widespread in Hungary. There's a lot of drinking. The drinking age is a lot lower in Hungary, so people start pretty early. Smoking as well, tea, coffee. The hardest ones for them to kick were smoking and drinking, because those are both very culturally accepted things,